Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brandy, for that introduction, and thank you, Dan, Kristen, and Audrey, for really highlighting um, the history of our city and also the current reality of our city and how public policy, both domestic and abroad, really influences some of the experiences that we're having today. It is my pleasure to introduce a panel of community residents to you all for this next portion. All Alexandria is our city government and our community's commitment to eliminating and reducing disparities experienced by all residents, but particularly residents of color and residents that are a part of other historically marginalized groups. And we get that as a result of the policy and the practice that government and many institutions have accepted and perpetuated, like Audrey, Dan, and Kristen have highlighted for us. So I'm going to introduce our panel. We are joined by Ms. Angy Alvarado, Mr. Tesfaye Amberber, and Mr. Andrew Winfrey. They are long-term residents of Alexandria, and we know that we cannot do the work of racial equity or the work of all Alexandria without really highlighting and centering community voice in decision-making. So I want to start with this question for all of you and really ask what struck you about the previous panel's discussion on the history of enslavement in Alexandria and current immigration patterns and statuses in Alexandria. So let's start with Tesfaye, and I don't see Andrew on my pin screen. I don't know if that's everybody's experience.
Yeah, I think he might have dropped off. So we are in the process of trying to find him.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll start with Tesfaye and then go to Angy. So what struck you about the previous conversation from our historians?
Thanks so much, Jaqueline. I learned a lot about the sacrifices of African Americans throughout history, and the fact that like I myself immigrated from Ethiopia, able to live in Alexandria and work, drive in the street, go to get public services because of the blood and sweat sacrifice of African Americans that they paid. When I came here, like almost 30 years ago, because of what the work that I already accomplished, every place public services that I need to go, like city services, or libraries, or the MEV, all these already available because the law is changed. And I learned a lot because I'm originally from Ethiopia and I really value the value of freedom. As a person who originally came from Ethiopia, a country never colonized, independent country, and I now relate with that, the value of freedom that the ancestors a long time ago in Ethiopia sacrificed and defended the country's independence. If they did not do that, the same thing would have happened to Ethiopians now. And so I really understand that because the sacrifice of African Americans were able to live in the United States now and get services that we need.
Thank you for sharing that. Angy, we're not able to see you. Are you able to turn on your video?
It's on. You can't see me?
We cannot.
Okay, let me try again. Can you see me now?
No, I'm not sure. Maybe it's covered up or something. We saw you earlier.
Okay. Can you see me now?
No.
No one can see me?
I don't think so.
No. That's so weird.
I could see her before.
It says my camera is on. Like I can see myself.
Okay. Well, we'll have you answer the question and then
okay.
we can troubleshoot thereafter. So what struck you about the previous panelists' discussion on immigration patterns, but also enslaved persons in Alexandria?
I thought it was very interesting. Everything was so like, how do I explain it? Like very interesting because like I didn't know any of that. I knew about the Black History Museum. I've gone there before with my kids at CASA, and we've taken a tour of the museum and everything like that. But all these new like monuments, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about all. I liked how Miss Audrey showed the pictures of the lady who jumped off the building. All that was so interesting to me, and I loved it, honestly. I also loved Kristen's present questionnaire and everything like that about Central American. I didn't know that Cubans also came here. It was all, I didn't know the owner of St. Elmo's was Cuban. All of that was great information that I didn't know about.
Great, thank you. Were we able to find Andrew?
No, we're still working on that. Sorry, Jaqueline.
It's okay. Um, so Angie, I'm going to suggest that maybe you log off and come back on in hopes that we can see you.
That's
Um,
okay.
and then I'll ask Tesfaye the second question we have. Can you tell us your story, your family's story related to Alexandria and how race and ethnicity has played a part in your experience?
I would like actually to make general because I want to mention about others, similar situation like myself, not just telling about my personal story because my personal story is related to a number of other Ethiopians who migrated to Ethiopia. And as Dr. Christine Moon explained, in large number Ethiopians come to the United States after the overthrow of Haile Selassie back in 1974 because of the military coup and instability. A lot of Ethiopians left the country and come in small numbers. And during the 1980s, armed rebel movement in Ethiopia, a lack of stability. Because of that, political reasons, and a large number of Ethiopians are coming here. And they have different backgrounds. Some are professionals like medical doctors, engineers, nurses, pilots, and members of the military, police officers, government bureaucrats, and even from the rural area, farmers. So it's a very diverse composition of people. And in Alexandria, it's a very welcoming city. And I personally have not faced any hurdles in adjusting. I've been living here since 2003. And my children attended Alexandria City Public Schools. And it's a very good place for immigrants to get accepted, and I've not experienced any problem personally. But what I can see is like on racial equity area, more needs to be done, like a representation of African Americans in city boards and commissions. And it's very good that city council is African Americans are represented. And when I speak that as an Ethiopian, I belong to the larger African American community. We are part and parcel of African American community, even though I have immigrated here with my native language, religion, culture, like food and music, and values and norms, and such as different customs and traditions. All this is for the immigrant community, person like myself, but my children are first generation Americans. They are part and parcel. There is no difference between them and the rest of the African American community. That my heritage is their heritage, but they live in the United States. So the virtues and the values or anything negative also applied to them. So my recommendation is having like more representation. It's going in the right direction. It's good, but we need to see more like a representation of commissions and city agencies. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And I think you bring out a good point about the nuances of the immigrant experience, but also how it is incorporated with sort of the lived African American experience, and how the two start to merge when we start to think about the American experience, and how it converts to each other. Angie, I'm so glad we can see you now. So thank you for leaving and coming back. Tell us your story and your family's story in relationship to Alexandria, but also how your race and ethnicity and background play into that experience.
Of course. So my parents are from Honduras and we're from southern Honduras. So we immigrated, my parents immigrated to the US, leaving four of my siblings back home. And they immigrated because of very terrible conditions that were going on in Honduras. There's a lot of poverty. And so my dad immigrated first, and then my mom followed as well. When my parents came to the US, they first came to like the Springfield area. And then my older cousins, my mom's nephews, also immigrated and they immigrated to Chirilagua. So they came here and my parents moved with them as well. And I've known Chirilawa since I was born. I was born here in Alexandria. I remember, I know the apartment number, I know the apartment building in Executive Avenue where my parents lived at when I was first born. So, um, uh, as my family moved here, they've all we know is Chirilawa, and my mom loves this place with all her heart, and I know that because she never wants to move away. She's always like, Alexandria, she was like, Alexandria is my home, she's like, Chirila was my home. And the reason why that is because we just have so Chirilawa feels like we're back home. And I truly understand her because I go to Honduras back home every year and it feels like I'm here. I know everybody knows everyone. Everybody says hi. You walk down the street and you see food vendors, and back home it's the same way. So I understand her ties emotionally and culturally. So it's very this is my place. And me as an Alexandrian, I am very proud of being Alexandria. I love Alexandria. Everybody's so welcoming. It's so nice. You know, there's so many different cultures here. It feels like such a pub, like with different people. I have many friends like that are from different cultures, like going to TC Williams. I've met so many people from different places, and it's wonderful. So yeah.
Thank you. So, based on both of your experiences, how do you define race and social equity? What does that mean to you? Are you still there?
Yeah,
Okay, let's go with Angie first, and then we'll go back to Tesfaye.
cool.
I'm sorry, I think that's a question for me.
Oh, yeah. So, based on your personal experience and your lived experience within Alexandria, how do you define race and social equity? What does that mean to you? What does racial equity mean to you?
Yeah, I've been to different parts of the United States. I lived in Nevada for some time, and also Maryland and Washington, D.C. Uh, so comparing these places, Alexandria is doing things in the right direction. It's inclusivity and acceptance of the people with different background, language, ethnicity, religion is very good. So it has to continue this way. I've not had any adverse or any negative experience personally. So it's good.
Thank you. And Angie, how would you
Um,
define race or social equity, or what does that mean to you in the Alexandrian context?
Personally, I feel like Alexandria tries very hard for there to be equity with races, but I feel like obviously we know that there isn't a lot of equity with our races. Um, for example, our Landria Chirilawa is very Hispanic, Central American based, and our living situation isn't the best. But then we just go up the street just a little bit in Del Rey and it's happy place. Everybody has a home. It's a lot of wealthy people. And so it's crazy how like just the street divides us and how you see two different worlds. I work at Stomping Ground in Delray, and I talk a lot to our customers, and I had a conversation with one customer about, he asked me where I'm from and everything like that, and I told him, oh, my family's originally from Honduras, but I live just down the street. And I was like, I live in Chirilagua. And he's like, what's that? And so I'm like, it's literally down Mount Vernon Avenue. You'd recognize it because you see a lot of Central American people. And he's like, oh, I've never been there before. Or he's like, I'd never heard about it before. And I'm like, in my head, I was like, that's crazy. Like, we live literally down the street and you've never been there. And so it blows my mind how segregated we are. And, working in Stomping Ground in Delray, just, it's crazy the difference, and also the, like, how do I say, like, the blindfold that a lot of the residents in Delray have about my living situation and where I live, and how it's literally just down the street. A lot of these people don't see the difference, and how it impacts us down the street. There's this like rush of mostly white families moving into Delray and going to Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon has a high Central American population of kids. And a lot of my kids that I work with go to Mount Vernon. And recently that I've heard of is that Mount Vernon, when they open up schools, they have a limited number of kids that can go. And my sister, my niece goes to Alexandria Public Schools, and they told us that there's a certain number of kids that can go to Mount Vernon just because it's so impacted. But to me, it's crazy because, like, it's Alexandria, it's also a public school. And so for sure, equity isn't there in Alexandria. And Delray and Arlandria is a perfect example.
Can I add one more thing here?
Go ahead.
Yeah, in regard to the services that the Ethiopian, Eritrean, and other African immigrant community needs, affordable housing in Alexandria is becoming very, very expensive year by year. And the city needs to do more, allocate budget so that people who live in Alexandria can afford to live, like having subsidized units or encouraging families to purchase homes. So this current trend that we see now, this ethnic composition of people, if this gentrification continues in this manner, down the road, all people who can't afford to live here obviously are going to move out. So this might not last longer. So now, yesterday there was a city council and mayor election. I think the new administration will consider this basic fact of equity, affordability of housing needs to be paid attention. A lot of people are affected by it because they can't afford family of four living in one bedroom apartment. And also this COVID really exposed their vulnerability. They don't have no savings. Most of these families are new to the country. They have nowhere to turn to. So affordable housing is a really critical need in Alexandria.
Thank you both for highlighting so much. And Angie really highlighting that for all intents and purposes, Alexandria is a very prosperous city, one of the most prosperous cities in the country. But when we take that closer look at certain communities within Alexandria, even the rest of us residents may not be aware of it, right? And that's something that we have to acknowledge. That is something that all Alexandria is striving to do, is really to strike that tone of our interconnectedness as a community, and that we are all sort of in this together. And we have to know the conditions and the circumstances by which our fellow residents are living in. We have to open our eyes to that experience, and we have to be involved in how we can help each other grow and learn. My next question is, what is your vision for the future of Alexandria? And I am really pleased that you all have highlighted really some policy decisions that can be made. We've talked about affordable housing. We've talked about access to services. And really, when I think about some of those things, I start to think about life expectancy, or you've talked about schooling and who can go to which schools, right? All of these are policy decisions that government needs to weigh in on from the racial equity lens and perspective. So you all are very attuned to that and aware of it. So what is your vision for the future of Alexandria? If you could close your eyes for 5 to 10 seconds, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like if we were living in a racially equitable Alexandria, in a city where there weren't any barriers, or if you just go up the street, maybe everybody owns their own home, right? We're not living in overcrowded or infested conditions for some communities. So what would that look like for you? And let's start with Tesfaye for that question and then go to Angy.
Yeah, I envision that like the parks and recreation in the city, the environmental aspects of maintaining like trees and parks currently is good, and I want that to continue because that affects quality of life of people who live in the city, and overcrowding of the public roads. Some streets are dedicated lanes for bikes, and I really like that to continue so that Alexandria can accommodate people who drive, bike, every mode of transportation. That's a really critical piece of quality of life. And as I indicated earlier, housing affordability needs to be planned, and the city's population growth and housing, new houses that are built here need to have dedicated units for low-income people who live and work in the city. I envision that needs to continue. And I mentioned earlier, more African-American representation in the city boards and commissions. These are really important when running the city. So that has to continue, and also the public school needs to continue the way they're doing now by being inclusive and encouraging and including every parents to get involved in their children's education. So I envision that. And one other last aspect that I forgot to mention earlier is healthcare. I work in Alexandria City Public Schools, so when new families come here for like health screening, if they don't have no health insurance, to have their children's physical checkup, they have no way to go to. The health department currently don't provide that, as far as I know. So they have to have money to pay for private providers, doctors to do that. It is very important for the children. So I envision that the health department provide services for those who can't afford, because like you mentioned earlier, Alexandria is very wealthy. Very few segment of population seek these services. So from financial perspective, it's not gonna cost an arm and a leg for the city budget. So this can be done. So I envision this to be done in the future.
Sharing that. Angy, what is your vision for equitable Alexandria?
So I'm fairly young, but my vision for like 10 years down the line, when I do have children, or by any chance I do move away, I still want to come back and be able to say, this is Chirilawa, I lived here throughout my whole life. And to me, it's been scary, probably not coming back and finding Chirilawa the same way, just because of all the different impacts that are going on, like Amazon, all the gentrification, the housing problems going up, the fact that housing isn't affordable. Honestly, like that's really the reason why 6 to 10 people live in a 1-bedroom apartment, because housing isn't affordable, especially in Chirilawa. A lot of the apartment complexes are owned by these huge corporations and developments, and it's not affordable at all for the people that live there. But that's why they live in such terrible conditions, because they can't afford it. And so I wish to come back and be able to still say, I grew up here. This is where Veronica's used to be. This is where Casa used to be, or the 24 Express. And it's scary that so many things are going on so fast that that might not be possible. So I feel like um, Alexandria could step in and fix a racial and equity with it, because the difference, like a lot of people are moving into Alexandria and pushing us out, pushing brown and a lot of people out, and it's hard because Alexandria is so welcoming. Everybody loves Alexandria, and it's hard to leave. Like it's very hard for my mom to be able to leave, but slowly and surely it's not becoming affordable, and you know it's hard. So that's what I envision, to be able to come back and be like, I went to school here, or um, this is where I used to live, and this is where I grew up.
I just want to say that I am inspired by both of your stories, and um, your experience, because I think that this is something that we can do. I believe that we can achieve racial and social equity within Alexandria. That we are a community that is rather small, and if we have the intentionality and approach, and the policy to support some of these decisions, we can preserve neighborhoods, right? We can invest in neighborhoods. We can be strategic about what needs to be done. So my last question for you, and I think then we'll be able to open it up to a few questions from the audience, is what are the most important steps, in your opinion, that we could take to achieve your vision of racial equity? And when I say we, I mean everybody who is attending the Impact Forum. I mean everybody who's a part of city government, and everybody who's a part of the Alexandria community, because we know that this is not something that we can do on our own. This is a collective and universal effort to achieve racial and social equity. So what are the most important steps, in your opinion, that we can take to achieve that vision?
Me, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Like you mentioned earlier, the government, city government, and private sector, non-profit organization, and the faith-based community, and individuals need to come together and sketch a plan that how Alexandria can be sustained for the future, to maintain the racial composition as we see it now, and the quality of life of people, the environment, the roads. So there needs to be planning by incorporating all these ideas and formulate policy so that the future can be like now, with no disruption, and especially on housing, affordable housing. The budget needs to be really considered. One agency, the city government, is critical role here, and also there are corporations here willing, like Amazon and others are coming here. So they need to have like private and government partnership, and also the faith-based community. There are a lot of religious institutions and non-profit organizations and individuals. So come together and work together. Having a discussion like this is very important. So I want that to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me personally, I think the first steps that everyone can take in order to, like, see the social, to try to have social equity, is like just taking the blindfold off, like seeing what's there, and taking a risk, and maybe like the man in Del Rey, or if you live in Del Rey and have never gone to Chirilawa, just take a walk down the street, and you'll enter like a whole different world. It's crazy. Like you'll see food vendors at the side of the street, you'll see all these different cultures. You can stop by and go to Veronica's, for example, or 24, Marcella's Bakery, and you can get like original ethnic food from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Bolivia, and just trying to take a step and see what's out there, trying to get outside your bubble and just try out all these different new things, because we're there and we just want to be seen and respected. by everyone. And it's hard because a lot of us are undocumented, and it's a little bit scary for us just because we know that a lot of people, like a lot of people across the street, hold so much more power than we do. So, but we're not harmful. So, but we just want you guys to be able to include us and see us. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Tesfaye and Angie. Again, I'm inspired, and to be attempting to do the work of race and social equity from a city level um, is difficult and is challenging. And we can also always get caught up in the cynicism that this is too great of a task. But to know that there are residents like you who are willing to share your experience, who are willing to offer very thoughtful policy decisions and insights, lets me know that this is something that we can absolutely do and achieve. So I'm going to hand it, and I'm sorry that we missed Mr. Andrew Winfrey. He was actually at the local community center on the Zoom, and he was with us earlier. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it's unfortunate we weren't able to have his perspectives to really share about the African American experience in Alexandria. But we know that he would have provided very thoughtful insights. And so we'll just keep in mind that even the voices that were on this panel, there are so many more that could be represented. And we have to continue to elevate those voices in forums like this, but also in decision-making opportunities for city government, but also many of our local organizations. So I'm going to hand it over to Brandy to help us to maybe facilitate a few additional questions if there is time. So thank you all so much. I truly have enjoyed this and appreciate what you have offered to this space this morning.
Yes, thanks, Jacqueline and Angie and Tesfaye. You should read the chat. I mean, it's blowing up in the sense that people are so grateful for your honesty, for your leadership. I think some people are saying, are you going to run for city council or other offices in the future? So one question that came out was, do you feel like you have a voice in helping to shape the city's direction regarding some of the policies around social, economic development, school? And if not, what can we do to make sure that there is a path for you and your communities to be involved in some of this decision making and input?
I believe there needs to be like the city needs to support like community organization. Like there are a lot of Ethiopian Americans live here in Alexandria city, but we don't have no community center where Ethiopians get to come together as group. And since we are immigrant, we tend to trust each other and be more expressive of our feelings. So if there is such a center established in Alexandria, that center can work with the city government and the private sector. And when policy is formulated, we can have a say because we can be found as an organized entity if there is a community center. In Arlington County, there is an Ethiopian community center, but there is none in Alexandria city. So the city government needs to think about it, and so that we can be partners as organized group. So that can help that our input and our ideas and our views are incorporated in the policy making process. Thank you.
Sorry, what was the question again?
So can you talk about, do you feel like you have a voice in helping to shape policies around kind of social, economic, or development? And if not, what are some ways that we can help get you and your community involved in making some of these decisions and being part of that process?
I feel personally like the city has definitely tried, especially like partnering with Casa Chirilawa. I know a lot of our parents are in a directiva that also help, the parents keep in contact with people at school, or I know like the sheriff's office also does talks at Casa Chirilawa to try to, create a bigger bond and try to assist. So I feel like there's definitely trying to be like a connection for sure, but I feel like it takes a little bit more, like just a little bit more of different connections, and more people try to be interested and more people trying to connect with us. That way our bridge can be built stronger and there can be more connection for sure. But I feel like, slowly but surely we're definitely getting there. And our representation is definitely getting there and becoming a little bit more stronger each and every step of the way.
Fantastic. Okay, so I know there's so many more questions, but I know that we're about running out of time. So I want to give just an opportunity for Jaqueline to share just a little bit about the next steps that we can take as a community with the Racial Equity 30-Day Challenge. And then we're also going to ask our audience to give us some input as well. Jaqueline?
Absolutely. So I think that what has been highlighted here today is that we have a strong need for really understanding, embracing the truth of our history, and also understanding how that history is impacting our current realities and inequities. But then we also have to be action oriented. So what can we do next? What are the next steps? And as Angy so eloquently highlighted, um, many of us don't really know or understand our history. For some of us, this is the first time that we're learning about some of the monuments or the history of enslaved persons or the trade routes or the immigration patterns specific to, or the sheer diversity of our community in Alexandria. And so what we have created is a racial equity 30-day challenge. It is meant to be a primer and just an introduction to some of the key concepts we discussed here. So it starts with the Native Indigenous removal and the oppression that was experienced by Native Indigenous populations. And then it talks about slavery and enslaved persons in a universal setting. So really it starts with the history. And it's not meant to be a comprehensive history, but really sort of kind of touches on some of the key concepts that have been experienced. So it's 30 days. It's broken down into 4 weeks. It's a series of podcasts, news articles, YouTube videos that can be watched and are meant to be accessible for people who are just learning key concepts. So week 1 is just about history, because we know that we have to ground our experience in history. The second week is about allyship and your personal relationship with race. And so we know that race is not just happening at the interpersonal level, it's also happening at the systemic level. But in order to kind of scaffold our learning, we have to sort of sequence it in a way where we can break it down. So week 2 is about your interpersonal relationship with racism and allyship. Week 3 is about systemic and institutional racism. So really talking about how the environment, green space, wealth building, education, policing, all have a role. There are individual institutions who are carrying out, perpetuating and maintaining racial inequity. And so we have to tackle each institution in a very systemic and strategic way. And we have to understand it in that way in order for us to have larger solutions to some of the issues we're seeing. So that's week 3. And then week 4 is really about what are some specific next steps that we can take either as organizations or as individuals to find our role and our place in advancing racial equity in our community. So it will be a facilitated community conversation that we will have on a weekly basis. So we would expect you to complete week 1 reading and materials, and then come and have a fruitful conversation amongst each other about what you've learned or what you've taken away, what we can do differently, or how it has influenced you differently. Then you would come back for week 2, and we would do the same with week 2 and week 3 and week 4 materials. So this is the first time that we're going to be offering this as a community learning experience. And the goal is for us to all to learn and to kind of break down some of those barriers and take some of the blinders off. So I think that there is a poll. We are going to be offering it each Wednesday, starting next week, June 16th. But we want to ask you whether you prefer a time that is midday. I think 12 noon to 1 is the proposed time, or if you would prefer a time that is in the evening, 7 p.m. And we just know that we have an evolving sort of in-person / virtual experience with the coronavirus. And so we have been on Zoom for months now, almost a year or longer. And this will be a virtual experience. And it looks like overwhelmingly 12 noon is winning. So we all have that lunchtime break. So we want to be respectful of your time. It will be 1 hour. And so it should cover a lunch break. And we're happy to stay on 15 minutes or longer. But I'm really excited about this opportunity to learn and grow with you all, because we'll never all know everything about racial equity, because this is an evolving field of practice and knowledge that we often can grow in. So is the poll closed?